Welcome to the Link Online. And we're here once again to bring you news about Canada, and you can be watching us live on Facebook, also on our YouTube channel, and of course our very own Radio Canada International website. Just like to say hello to World Radio Paris and the shortwave service from Germany. Also Kauri 97.5 FM radio in Nigeria. And we're here with the regular team. You'll see us in just a moment after we get a look at, there we are, get a look at our great flag flapping gently in the breeze. I'm Mark Montgomery. With me today, fresh in from hair and makeup, we have Lavon Savance.
Hello.
Lynn Desjardins.
Hi, everyone.
And in the control room today, we have Marc-André Deschamps, Benoit Durand, and Commander Dutil. See, this is the old way of doing it, right? This is the new way. This is the old way. So I'm just old school on that. All right, coming up on the show this week, of course, the big main event all across Canada was the national election, and we're doing a lot of talk about that. But in just a moment, we're going to start off with a cultural event coming up here in Montreal. We're going to be talking about the Festival of the Arab World, which is taking place in Montreal. That's coming up in just a second. All right, we're going to be joined by Skype with Emily Awad, who is the Director of Communications for the Festival Monde Arabe, or Festival of the Arab World. There she is. Hello, Emily. How are you doing?
Hello, I'm doing fine, and you?
We're all very well. Now, tell us a bit about this festival. This is the 20th anniversary, correct?
Yes, it is.
How has it evolved over those 20 years?
It has evolved in a beautiful way. Of course, the festival has grown, is having international recognition and local and international recognition. We're touring our creations across the Canada, and we've been also expanding to other cities and stuff like that. The festival is like really growing, but of course, in the same time, we're having a hard time continuing because of budget cuts, because of a lot of financial issues that are actually inhibiting the good expansion and development of the festival. So it's like a balance. So this is why the theme of this year is, I will say it in French, 20 ans d'acrobatie. So it's like a sort of a metaphor to talk about actually the juggling that the team of the festival should do every year in order to succeed and in order to really advance and to hold an edition every.
So what does the festival feature this year?
So this is the 20th anniversary. We have, instead of 2 weeks, we have 3 weeks of events and shows and concerts. This year is very special. It's focusing a lot on women in the programming. We're starting tonight, actually. If it's not too late, for tonight we have the opening show. It's called Et Dieu créa la femme, which is I'm sorry, et la femme chante à Dieu. So, and womankind sang of God. So this show actually reunites Jewish, Christian, and Sufi Muslim chants. So a lot women, 25 women will be on stage. It's a show exclusively performed by women, and they will have like a fusion of sacred chants of three religions. And this is how we kicked off the festival tonight at Théâtre Maisonneuve, Place des Arts. We end the festival also with a great tribute to a great woman, actually, that has changed the whole Arabic world, which is Kulthum, like the great diva. So it's a tribute to her. Also, 3 great singers will be performing. We also have a lot of shows of oud master Nasir Shamma, who will be there with the flamenco guitar quartet. We have a show about Syria and the traditions and the traditional repertoire of all Syrian regions. So there's a lot of shows. There's a show of jazz, oud and jazz fusion. So it's like really different kinds of music, different musical sounds for really everyone, like for all ages and for all tastes.
What's the mix of overseas artists to domestic artists in this program?
I would say in the performing art, there should be like 70% of international artists and 30% of local artists. But we also have a section that is called of free shows. The free shows are actually performed by local artists. We have a section called Salon de la Culture. It's a culture forum where there's a lot of debates, conferences, and roundtables. This is also mainly we actually receive local guests, intellectuals, philosophers, professors, artists, etc. So it's a mix actually, but I would say for performing arts, it's like 70% of international art.
Are there films as well?
Films, yes, there are. We have a small section, a small cinema section, around 4 or 5 films, and it will be actually next weekend from the 2nd to the 4th of November at the Cinéma du Parc.
This has also been described in one of the local newspapers as militant and audacious, which are not usually the kind of words that you associate with a cultural festival. Tell me a bit about that.
I actually just talked about the militant side of it because as I was saying, we're facing since 2001 not only budget cut but also the festival is actually called the Arab World Festival. The word Arab is associated with a lot of negative connotation. So this is why every time there's an event happening in the world, let's say in 2007, Les Accommodements Raisonnables in Quebec, 2001, September 11, every time there's something in the news, it's like kind of reflected the festival. Some sponsors want to actually pull out. Like there's a lot of things happening. So this is why every year we have to struggle to keep on going. And this is why it's a militant festival, because we've been every year really struggling to continue and to keep up the festival with the good quality. Audacious because for the 20 years we always had provocative, sometimes very audacious themes. Let's say we had in 2006 the edition was called Prophète Rebelle, rebellious prophets. In 2013 we had the theme Hilarus Delirus. It was actually the poster was a clown that had the head chopped off with a violin. So there's always something like very audacious in the programming. We also had a show called Erotic Halal. So it's always a questioning, a festival that is always questioning everything in culture and religion, and it's the essence of the festival actually.
Just as a final question then, Emily, you of course want to attract people from the non-Arab community as well. Why should people come and see this?
Actually, surprisingly, the audience is 50-50, or sometimes it's more Quebecois or like Canadians than the Arab community. It's actually the audience of the festival is a public that is curious about and passionate about discovering other cultures, discovering new types of music. So the festival is actually not destined for the Arab community. It's actually a festival that aim to build bridges between the Arab and the Western culture. So this is it's a platform for dialogue and for the meeting of Eastern and Western culture, and this is how we actually gather an audience from here, from there, like from Quebec and from the Arab.
Emily Awad, thank you very much for this.
Thank you.
And that was Emily Awad, who is the spokesperson, the Director of Communications for the World Arab Festival, which is going on this week in Montreal. Coming up, we're going to be talking about the biggest news event in Canada this past week, the election, the federal election. Well, Canadians from coast to coast to coast went to the polls this past week and elected, as was predicted, a minority government. The question, of course, was which minority government, Liberal or Conservative? Llewellyn, you've looked at this story. What do we have?
Well, of course, the Liberal Party, which was the incumbent, the government before the election, won 157 seats, and that's short of the 170 seats that you need to form a majority government in the House of Commons. The House of Commons has 338 seats in Canada. So they will have to now rely on the support of other parties to stay in power. Their main rivals, the Conservatives, took 121 seats this time. The separatist Bloc Québécois party, which runs candidates only in the French-speaking province of Quebec, won 32 seats. The center-left New Democrats elected 24 members of parliament. The Green Party increased its count to 3 members of parliament. And the former Liberal Cabinet Minister, Attorney General, and Minister of Justice, Jody Wilson-Raybould, was re-elected as the only independent member of Parliament. In fact, in terms of the popular vote, the Conservatives got slightly more than the Liberals. They got 34.4%, while the Liberals got 33.1%. But you wouldn't know this if you had listened to Prime Minister Justin Trudeau's speech Monday night as he addressed Liberal supporters in Montreal. Trudeau sounded as if he had just won another majority government.
Merci! Merci, mes amis! Thank you, my friends! Merci, Montréal! Quelle soirée incroyable! Thank you all, my friends! From coast to coast to coast, tonight, Canadians rejected division and negativity. They rejected cuts and austerity, and they voted in favor of a progressive agenda and strong action on climate change. I have heard you, my friends. You are sending our Liberal team back to work, back to Ottawa with a clear mandate. We will make life more affordable. We will continue to fight climate change. We will get guns off our streets, and we will keep investing in Canadians.
Well, the reality soon caught up to the Liberals. While they had won more seats than the Conservatives, they had lost all of their seats in Alberta and Saskatchewan, including such high-level or high-profile members of Parliament, Cabinet Minister Ralph Goodale, who was Canada's Public Safety Minister. Given that the Liberals are 13 seats short of a majority, they will have to rely on other parties to stay in power. So it's either the New Democrats or the Bloc Québécois, or maybe even their arch-rivals, the Conservatives. And Trudeau sounded a lot more contrite as he faced reporters and, answered questions about working with the opposition and addressing deep divisions in the country. This is a clip from his press conference on Wednesday.
Canadians gave me a lot to think about on Monday night as they returned us in government, but with a clear requirement to work with other parties on the priorities that Canadians spoke clearly to during the election campaign, particularly affordability and the fight against climate change. And I'm going to take the time necessary to really reflect on how best to serve Canadians and how to work with those other parties. I think that's what the people who voted for me and the people who didn't vote for me expect, and I'm going to make sure that we get down to work by doing that.
Follow up, sir. You've said now that you think all Canadians have to work towards keeping the country together, united. Specifically, what do you expect the premiers, Kenny and Moe, to do, and what do you expect Conservative provincial leaders to do?
I expect premiers Kenny and Moe and all premiers to stand up for the interests of their citizens. That's their job. And people in Alberta and Saskatchewan have been suffering and struggling because of circumstances beyond their control. And we have, over the past few years, endeavored to be supportive. We have endeavored to get those resources to new markets, and we're well advancing on that. But there is more we need to do, and I look forward to conversations with all premiers across the country about what the next things we should be doing to better serve Canadians.
And given all that, Trudeau still says he doesn't intend to enter into a formal coalition with any of the parties, and he will work with them on issue-by-issue basis. So the country is quite divided.
Well, indeed, the idea of working on an issue by issue as opposed to a formal opposition coalition, that has worked in the past. I believe that even worked for, in some cases, with his father's government. But
Yes.
Well, minority governments have traditionally, in some cases, have done extremely well. Our whole healthcare system was created by a minority government.
But we haven't had coalitions necessarily, not on the federal level. We have had
Well, I think there was it in 1982 when the NDP and the Liberals entered more or less formal coalition, but it didn't work out very well for the NDP because the Liberals then got re-elected. They kind of cannibalized all of the NDP's progressive agenda and then got re-elected with a majority mandate again. So it's for the NDP again, this is going to be a question, like how far do they want to collaborate with the Liberals and push their agenda and allow the Liberals to get all the credits for it?
Well, this is one of the things that I spoke with a political science professor in Simon Fraser University in British Columbia about. Now, of course, this election, as we know, has left, in spite of what Mr. Trudeau said, Canadians coast to coast to coast has given us a mandate. Clearly, that is not the case because, as you mentioned earlier, they were wiped out in Alberta, they were wiped out in Saskatchewan, they got very few in Manitoba, they got very few in British Columbia, and if it hadn't been for Toronto proper, they probably would not be the government because Toronto proper and the surrounding GTA or Greater Toronto area,
The suburbs,
has like 50 seats in this tiny, tiny area of Canada. 50 seats alone. And 45 of those seats went to the Liberals. The rest of Ontario did not vote for Trudeau. So anyway, the country, of course, now is very divided. And I asked Sanjay Jaram about this. As I mentioned, he's a teacher of political science. And I wanted to know about the rise of Quebec separatism, which has happened again under these 4 years of Trudeau, and the resurgence of this Western alienation. Here's what he had to say.
I would say that it's not so much a Quebec separatism, but a reconfigured Quebec nationalism, one that takes lead from the provincial Quebec government, the CAQ under François Legault, that is using a type of Quebec nationalism that is arguing that separatism is not at the moment in Quebec's interest, and if it does in the future become, then they will consider that then. But for the moment, they're more concerned with ensuring that Quebec's autonomy is respected and trying to get the best deal for Quebec within the Federation. So the specific issues that dominated the campaign that probably helped Blanchette win extra seats, in particular, Bill 21, the religious neutrality bill, was a big one, and his continued defense of the social license that bill has in Quebec, and arguing that Quebec needs to have its own greater immigration powers, even though it has some already, and that Quebec should have autonomy to prevent any big industrial projects like pipelines that run through its borders. So these are the kinds of things that he continued to stand up for, but at no point did he mention separatism. And so I guess in the rest of Canada, there may be that perception, but I think there is no real imminent threat of a referendum on sovereignty in Quebec right now.
And yet the crowd was chanting un pays, a country, and what he's asking for is all the trappings of a separate country, though.
Yeah, and we have a history of accommodating Quebec's distinctiveness through asymmetrical federalism. This isn't something we haven't done before, of course. Yeah, and these chants, I wonder if these are more legacy chants to rile up the base more so than a realistic call for a country right now. I could be proven wrong, but In the short term, I don't think that Blanchet or Legault have any intention of raising the specter of separatism.
Now, Justin Trudeau has said that he wants to govern for all Canada, but he still must have a big problem with no representatives from the West, for example, and not that many in Quebec anymore.
He is absolutely a big problem. So if we move over to the West and we think about the implications there, we have him shut out in Alberta and Saskatchewan, and this growing resentment, this perception that he is hostile towards the oil and gas sector that these two provinces, Alberta and Saskatchewan, are dependent on. And you have two conservative premiers, Scott Moe and Jason Kenney, just taking sort of highlights in the letters that Scott Moe and Jason Kenney sent to Justin Trudeau yesterday after the election. Scott Moe, point one was cancel the carbon tax. In Jason Kenney's letter, he says that to restore credibility, he must not use the NDP, Greens, or Bloc for any passing of legislation in the House of Commons, effectively ensuring that the Conservatives are on board because Albertans and Saskatchewaners voted for Conservatives. And so both of those demands are obviously very stringent. And you think about the first one from Scott Moe. I mean, Justin Trudeau campaigned on a carbon tax. He's not going to cancel the carbon tax. So if you take those demands as a sort of starting point for this relationship, boy, it's going to be a difficult nation to govern. And Justin Trudeau is really going to have to think carefully about how he constructs his cabinet without any representation from those provinces in the short term as well.
And that was a conversation, part of my conversation with Sanjay Jaram. He's a political science professor at Simon Fraser University in British Columbia. And as he mentioned there, one of these things that is a big issue in the campaign and going to be a big issue going forward is, of course, climate, which you looked at.
Well, listen, there was deep satisfaction at the number of votes that went to the parties which pressed hard for this big reduction in greenhouse gases on the part of all the environmental groups. One of the groups is the Climate Action Network Canada, and I spoke with its executive director, Catherine Abreu.
Well, this is really Canada's first climate election and has pretty fundamentally shifted the politics of climate change in this country. We saw 63% of Canadians vote for parties that had strong climate platforms. We saw each of the federal parties feel the pressure to deliver climate platforms, although there was a significant variance in the quality of those platforms. And we saw climate change rise as the number one substantive policy issue that cut through the mudslinging and name-calling that otherwise characterized this election.
What are some of the ideas that were part of the campaign that you would like to see implemented?
When we take a look at the platforms that were delivered by those parties that are going to have to work together under this minority government to get the job done, we see that the Liberals, the New Democratic Party of Canada, the Green Party of Canada, all agree that this country needs to step up the ambition of our climate commitments. So we need to meet that 2020 deadline set out by the UN to come back to the table with a stronger commitment under the Paris Agreement. We need to legislate long-term emissions reduction targets and some shorter-term targets that help us get there, as well as holding ourselves accountable for those commitments and establishing institutions that keep us on track. But what the other parties talked about and agreed upon was the need for Canada to have a conversation about economic diversification and job creation as we move away from polluting industries and toward a climate-safe future. And that's something that I think we're going to have to see some significant movement on in the near term.
Now, as you said, this Liberal government is in a minority position. So how much do you think it can accomplish, given that it is a minority?
Well, let's look to the history of minority governments in Canada. We've seen some very significant achievements under minority governments. National health care in Canada happened under a minority government, as did universal pension plans in this country. So I think we can see significant climate achievements be added to that list of something positive that a minority government can deliver. And indeed, I think we'll see the NDP and the Greens push the Liberal government to go further than it might go on its own when it comes to the issue of climate change. Doesn't mean there won't be some tricky conversations happening in the House of Commons, particularly around the future of fossil fuel infrastructure projects like the Trans Mountain Pipeline. But I actually think some of those tricky conversations are exactly what Canada needs to have as we plan for an economic and environmentally safe future. I come from the east coast of Canada. My family was affected by the collapse of the cod fishery on the east coast in the 1970s that forced them to move away from Nova Scotia, forced many families to leave communities in the Maritimes to find work in other parts of the country. And the reason that happened is because even though politicians foresaw the collapse of the cod fishery, they didn't plan for it. And I want us to make sure that we are not in the same position in the next couple of decades, that we see that this oil and gas industry, the most polluting industry in the country, does need to wind down gradually. It's not going away tomorrow, but it does need to wind down gradually over time. And that we need to plan for that and prepare for it, have conversations with workers and communities about what they need to prepare for it, and invest in the industries of the future that are going to protect people and the planet as we move forward.
And that was part of the conversation with Catherine Abreu of Climate Action Network Canada. So, the government's going to have a very difficult time walking this fine line between satisfying the desires of people who are very worried about climate change and the people in the West who are very worried about maintaining the oil industry and having that pipeline built.
Yeah, and losing their livelihoods too, because
yes.
It's been one of the biggest chambers of the economic engine of Canada, this oil and gas industry in Saskatchewan and Alberta, and it will take some time for Canada to diversify its economy, especially for these provinces.
Well, and there was actually an editorial in today's Globe and Mail newspaper suggesting that the budget that was just brought down by the Premier of the province of Alberta did not take that into account, and the criticism was that they should have put more money into developing these new technologies and providing new jobs, just taking the lead on that. But apparently, I don't know, I haven't looked at the budget, so I don't know what's in there. But clearly there needs to be province-wide and federal government initiatives to develop the new technologies so that there will be jobs for the Canadians who lose the jobs in the oil industry.
The idea of this government, as a minority government, being able to pass legislation, it's probably not as hard as what we think it is, because, as Levon pointed out, they could easily nip little pieces of platforms and policies from the other parties and get them passed, because they only need 13 votes from one of the other parties to do this.
So they could actually use the Conservatives to pass the pipeline measures, and they could use the other parties to pass environmental. However, the fly in the ointment is that in order to pass a budget, and most laws that you need to pass require money, so that's where the government can fall. That said, there is no party that is in a position right now to take down the government and have another election. They're all broke. They're all tired. So things are going to be quiet for a little while.
Well, the thing about the budget is that this is very important, because this is one of the things that the West was concerned about, is they are saying if the Liberals join with either the NDP or the Greens or
the Bloc
Québécois on these budget issues, because some of these parties like the NDP and the Greens want they want big, expensive platforms like pharmacare, for example. And the deficits that the Trudeau government have been running have been extremely high, and people are worried about this ongoing deficits. We can't afford this kind of thing. So that's another issue that may be playing into where this... And the interesting thing is that historically, minority governments last about 2 years.
Yeah. 18 to
24
months.
We could be doing it all over again.
Well, listen, if they don't pass the budget, it's a confidence issue. So we might be back in the polls again very soon.
Yeah.
Because the government can pass legislation and insist that it's not a confidence motion, even if it fails. But the budget typically is defined as a confidence motion. So.
And I'll be looking to November 20th when they unveil their new government to see how are they going to represent Western Canada. This is going to be another exercise and a juggling act for this Liberal government.
They might actually turn someone who is not a sitting member of Parliament, go somewhere else to find someone else from the West who could become a senator, who could become a cabinet minister. The Prime Minister has the right to do that.
an interesting year or two in politics to come. That's all the time we have for the program for today. A reminder, once again, if you want to, you can go to our webpage and download our free app. It's on the right-hand side of the webpage, the home page, or as they say in the naval business, on the starboard side. Or I guess if you're in the airplane business as well. And it's free, and that will take you to the Apple or Android web pages where you can download that free app. So for Levon and Lynn and myself, Mark Montgomery, and for our technicians, Marc-André, Benoit, and Commander Dutil, that's all the time we have for today. Take care until next time. Bye-bye.